The next thing we want to look at is mitigation, because again, we're trying to do experiments here. How can we address this mammoth backlog of sites? How are we going to do it? We're going to identify them. Once we identify them, then what are we going to do? We need to have a plan to address that. So we looked at that same issue here as well. And a lot of people, no surprise, when you identify a problem, ultimately you might want to do an SSDS system as a longer-term solution, but that takes time as well. And what can you do right away to knock the levels down, particularly for things like TCE, where every day matters. And people, and we did here as well, deployed Air Purifying Units, we call them APUs. And these are small portable units that you can buy off the shelf at Walmart in some cases, and deploy at houses and use to treat the VOCs that are in the indoor air. The VOCs are removed typically via absorption onto activated carbon. There can be other techniques as well, but most of them are activated carbon. This is especially important for TCE cases due to concerns over even short-term exposures. Every day matters. And at the Newton site, we ended up deploying 8. The brand that we used was Austin Air HealthMate Plus Air Purifying Units to 6 homes. In 2 homes, we had 1 unit in the basement as well as the first floor because the basement was at 180 and it needed a lot of help, that particular house. And this is typical, nothing magic here, not rocket science. Austin Airmates use a mixture. They have a media, they have a HEPA filter and a media that contains activated carbon, zeolite for the moisture, and they also have potassium iodide as an oxidizing agent for things like formaldehyde. But the activated carbon is what we were interested in terms of the VOCs, the TCE removal. This unit had a 3-speed fan, 47 CFM, 125, and 250. We found that at 250, people shut it off because it was very noisy. So we kept it on 125 in order to have people not shut it off. That was the good medium. All right, so how do you know that these things are going to work and how well do they work? And typically people use what? The isotherms, right? You get the isotherms, and after much prodding, I finally got the isotherm from the manufacturer after much prodding. You think it was a nuclear secret, and they gave us an isotherm, and isotherms just show in terms of the concentration and the loading. And the loading is, in this case here, grams of contaminant per 100 grams of carbon. That's how you design activated carbon. It's an absorption phenomenon where increased concentrations lead to increased loading of the media. So people use isotherms to evaluate the effectiveness and life of the filter that you're using. And we figured out, based upon the information from the manufacturer, that these filters can certainly last a good amount of time, between 6 months and a couple of years, depending upon the actual concentrations in the house, depending upon how much of the TCE was actually being sorbed, 100% versus 50%. So these should work pretty well because they are activated carbon. So we try to figure out, well, how well did they actually work? So we have them in 6 homes, and I have homes here, 1 through 6. And here we have the days. Day 0 is when these units were put in and plugged in and turned on. And we have negative time before then when we took grab sample. This is mostly grab sample data here. And then we have days up to 80 days afterwards. And what did we see here? We saw, of course, the pre-deployment, we had as high as 180 in one of the locations. Home 4 had a basement apartment, and that had initially 120 micrograms per cubic meter of TC, pretty high level. So they all dropped pretty well, after 10 to 30 days. They all dropped pretty well. And they got below the 20 microgram per cubic meter trigger for imminent hazards for all populations. However, they struggled to get below the 6 microgram per cubic meter that we have for sensitive populations with pregnant women. That was an issue. Also, that very same house that did all the sampling, this nice lady, allowed me to put a unit in her basement, and once again every day she sampled the air in her basement to see the effect of the air quality once the APU was activated. So here, this was the preceding 16 days. The APU was put on, and there was some drop. Again, we were around 10, and it dropped down to like 6 or 7, stayed pretty steady. And then I think she went away for a week, and then about a week later, it was down to right around 6. Now, again, analytically, these are pretty close to the same number. I guess there's some drop here overall, But again, the 6 microgram per cubic meter was tough to consistently meet. You know, it wasn't showing that here. After, in this case here, how many days? About 2 or 3 weeks. So again, they were very good to get down to less than 20, not so good to get down to less than 6. Why would that be? You have lots of carbon. You do the calculations. Why aren't we seeing, you know, nothing? A couple of things. One, people know that there's also something called competitive absorption, and indoor air is full of other stuffs besides TCE, and you're going to get absorption of other things. And in fact, if you look at their sorptive capacity, there are many things that are much more sorptive than TCE. Here's the kind of the list here. This is the least sorptive, most sorptive. TCE is kind of in the top third here. But there are other things like limonene that we find in everyone's house. It's a cleaning agent. That's pretty good sorption potential. We find a lot of hydrocarbons. The C9, C10, C11 hydrocarbons are in everyone's house. So we see a lot of those. We see toluene in everyone's house. So there are other things in the air that are going to take up sorption sites, and that's going to decrease the effectiveness of these units on TCE in our case here. So that's an issue. However, we did look at the actual total iron chromatograms for all the homes, and while there was stuff there, it doesn't explain why we weren't getting better absorption. But in any other application, we would advise you to always look at the total iron chromatograms to see what else is going to be interfering with the VOC of interest. So why are we not getting better results? And this goes, I think, to the question of questionable extrapolations. These isotherms that everyone sees and uses, did you know that when they develop these, they test their gas at 100 ppm V? That is the industry standard. 100 ppm V is when they do their test to get their sorptive relationship. And then they extrapolate from there. So we're worried about way down here. We're worried about 4 orders of magnitude lower than 100 ppm V. That's where we play, down here, with our TCE issues. So we're using data developed, 10,000 times higher than what we're actually worried about. And it turns out that, that is the concern. That extrapolation is probably not a good one. Doing a little bit of research, there's virtually no published information or data on how these systems work at low levels, low being defined as less than 50 ppb, which is hundreds of micrograms per cubic meter. There's really very little data on that, but some recent research, 2014, 2013, suggests that there may be significant differences in the extent and/or kinetics of VOC absorption at these low levels. Basically, a lot of this is diffusion-driven, and when you have less molecules that are bouncing around, you have less diffusion, and that may be why we're not seeing these better levels. So the cautionary tale here is these work great for getting less than 20 for TCE. Getting less than 6 may be a challenge that's worth watching closely.
Do you consider the possibility that the units aren't effectively pulling air from the whole space? Like you could test that by using multiple units and seeing if you're able to come lower with more coverage?
She's suggesting more good research stuff here. I need to write all this stuff down. That's a good point about putting more units in. And that might be the case.
You have more carbon, but you'd also have just greater air movement.
True, you have more carbon, more air movement. But again, the research shows that it may not be the carbon or air movement. It's just that when you have that low levels of concentrations, the diffusion into the small, micropores of the carbon may be affected. So, good question. That's an issue.
John, you mentioned that you observed that the radon systems seem to be very effective. Say a little more about the design of them. I mean, were they the simple, 2 foot by 2 foot square, a radon pit to the standard fan mounted outside the house type of deal, or?
Yeah, the question was the radon systems that were put in, and they were standard radon systems. And again, the important point was, and this is the indoor air, and the blue ones are the radon systems, and most of them had less than 1 of TCE. They were conventional radon systems, typically 3 to 4 inches PVC pipe, and they seem to have.
The pit design, not having to score out the whole basement, just put in the one square radon pit, EPA standard design.
Well, a lot of the the question was, did they use a pit, you know, a 12, 24-inch pit? And most of them didn't even use that. Most of them just, there's a wide variability in radon contractors. Yes, they were not all EPA radon mitigation standard poster childs, but they nonetheless were effective. Some of them actually weren't. Some of them had there were some detections for various reasons, but most of them were the standard systems, outdoor fan, you know, fan tech or radon away, and they seemed to be working pretty effectively. One extraction? No, some of them had more than one. Out here, the soil can be fairly compact, so more than one had 2 extraction points.
But no more than.
No.
Pretty good for home, I mean, and given that soil, so.
Yeah.
Just suggesting that the cost of those systems compared to extensive other indoor mitigation and or repeated sampling might tilt you in the favor of just
doing a radon system.
Doing a radon
which
system.
is cheaper, yeah.
Yeah.
well, no, that's what's more cost effective, but
Does the
again,
job.
more effective in the cost effective part, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, actually, the issue was that these are cost effective, you know, you should go right on them. And I agree, of course, it's important to pre-sample ahead of time so that we know it was already there, because people have a right to know it was already there. And I think putting a system is invasive to the homeowner. They're going to run the fan, they're going to electrical use, you know, so it might be an easy course for you to eliminate testing, but it's an invasive thing for the homeowner. So there's a middle ground there.
but to the assurance,
Yes.
to the homeowner who's concerned, to the young family, to the, who is concerned about, a higher level of certainty that the problem is now resolved.
Yes. Well, ultimately, that's the end game for all of these. In fact, we're putting the systems in next month here, at this site here. That's the end game. So absolutely, they should be looked at right away. The bids are due today. There you go. Question?
Hi, John. On that fan, on the fan number where it was stubborn down there at around 6, was there, before that fan was put in, was there an effort to identify and seal up any breaches in the foundation before the fan was turned on?
You mean the APU, the activated carbon? No, there was no effort to seal up anything. This was just to see how well the carbon units would work.
Okay.
Did you play with lower flow rates? I saw you had the middle flow rate, not the high flow rate, but how about even the lower flow rate? Wouldn't you have better absorption?
Bill, it's her job to suggest research projects for me. No, we didn't vary the flow. We can only do so much research. But I don't know if it would make a difference or not. Again, from the literature, there's not any data showing that these systems work no matter what you do at these low levels.
I mean, that unit you
that's
showed is probably $1,000, $2,000, isn't it?
For what?
The unit you just showed?
No, it costs about $700.
Okay.
We get them wholesale, I think.
I was just curious, there are 7 homes with imminent hazard levels, but you put APUs in 6 of them. Was the 7th one just a homeowner didn't want?
The 7th one was the one that had the radon system with the squirrel-induced broken fan.
Gotcha.
And then once that fan was replaced, we retested, and it was fine.
It was fine.
I appreciate that your goal here was to identify and address imminent hazards. However, there's a longer-term issue with these homes, which is there's still the issue of no significant risk, and many of them are fine because the radon system, effectively SSD systems, are operating. So, where does the department kind of go from here? I mean, like I said, I appreciate the goal of addressing imminent hazards, but there isn't a PRP. And there are still homes that haven't been evaluated or achieving no significant risk, or there are no deed restrictions on all of these homes to keep them operating. So,
Yeah,
John, you may not have that answer.
well, there's no
answer.
answer. The issue is, well, that's great, the imminent hazard, but there's a bunch of other houses that have stuff coming in, critical exposure pathway. What about them? And yeah, there's really no easy answers. The PRP is gone. All we have are innocent condominium owners that are now the PRP.
How did you handle the access and the notifications? Did you send a letter, follow up door to door, or how was that?
Where's Irene? She sweet talked her way into all these houses, I think.
We heard the suggestion, so we sent out a letter. We tried to follow up with phone calls. And as you probably know, getting phone numbers is pretty difficult these days. So I went and spent hours and hours knocking on doors and talking my way in. It's a very mixed neighborhood, so there were a lot of tenants, and we have to send the letters to the homeowners. So I had to give, it was a quick summary of here's the problem, here's the potential risk. I had information with me. Can I come in? It will take 5 minutes. And I mean, we got into 57 out of 70 homes, so it was pretty successful.
John, quick thought here on logistics and approach. IRAs, you can get a quick verbal approval from the department to install one of these. But if one wants to be a little more conservative and still have effects and they're not at the imminent level, you gotta submit a full RAM plan to do the air purifying units under the department. So it would be nice to have a verbal approval even for RAM, if you will.
Well, no, if you have a pathway at a home or school daycare, that's an IRA condition.
Correct.
So you're talking about a non-home school daycare, right?
Sure.
Well,
I mean, you should encourage people to put these units in when there's effects in there.
well, you didn't hear it from me. You can buy these at Walmart, these units. I mean, maybe you're worried about formaldehyde in your building.
I'm worried
I
about
didn't say
complying with the MCP
No.
on approaches.
Well, and from a health standard, right, I mean, the exposure to female workers or whatever, again, it's a short-term exposure over a fairly short period of time, so even if in a non-residential scenario, the risk is still there.
Yeah, I mean, even for non-residential, for TCE, you'll get an imminent hazard that, well, not 20, but some multiple of that based upon the use of the building.
Even if it's at 25, a whole RAM plan's got to go in to put the APUs in. No, Larry?
Well, first of all, no.
He said it, not me. Well, we'll talk afterwards.
Does the spent carbon become remediation waste 2 years later?
Yes.
Does the spent carbon become remediation? Well, that's an excellent question. It may be a hazardous waste because of TCLP, even though it's probably not listed because a lot of times you don't know the source of the TCE. So it could be a hazardous waste by TCLP. And that's our next project for research on this site. Once we install the SSDS next month, we're pulling out the APUs and we'll be doing that kind of experimentation.
What about the used APUs to sell?
No, we're going to be deploying them for all of our hundreds of sites that we need them. Question?
How was the air in the condos?
The condos had a radon system, so they were fine. Any other questions? I think we're running behind.
Just in terms of cost, I mean, I put a radon system in my house for $1,000, plus or minus a little. So it's not that much different than these units, and it's much more effective. It seems like with these issues. Just to throw it out.
Yeah, the comment was that she only paid $1,000 for her radon system. I got to tell you though, again, radon contractors' quality varies quite a bit, and some of the $1,000 systems may not be up to snuff. I think our systems here.
But yeah,
So the ones we're putting in here, we put out specs that are going to require a certain amount of work pursuant to the radon mitigation standard, as well as standard engineering techniques. The old shop vac, putting in the hole and listening for the line and determining the fan, is I think the standard actually, and we're not doing that here. No.
And what kind of costs are you seeing, John, come up for your
The
specified?
bids are due today.
Any idea? Ballpark?
Well, no bids are due today.
Any other questions?
are you going to put out a white paper or something on this? Is there something published?
Think it'd be useful?
I think it would be very useful.
Yeah, I was.
For the community as well as the LSP community.
Yeah. The question is, it's going to be published, and I think I've been waiting also to do the SSDS to include that, the diagnostics, the installation, the monitoring. It's kind of a full package. Yeah, we'll do that.
Will these slides be on the advisory committee website?
Yes.
Along with the video.
Oh, wait a minute. Did I say things in the video? It's like the Nixon tapes, right? Yeah. All right, I guess that's it. So I think we're running behind, so here you go.
thank you very much, both the presentation and the research and the work.